Uneducated Economist. Wow, we got 20 something, 23 people already up in here. Man, you're all ready for this one, right? Talk about housing prices, and everybody just wants to jump on and see what the hell's going to happen next, at least from the lumber supply industry side of things. Let's take a look at what's happening here. If you take a look down in the description of this video, right now I have a bunch of links to some articles out there talking about mill closures that are taking place. Now, this is something that we have been experiencing here up in the Pacific Northwest, especially in Oregon, with some recent law changes that have taken place that make it very difficult for a lot of these loggers and mill operations to conduct themselves in the way they once had. So now what we are finding is that mill closures are starting to take place here in the Pacific Northwest. And now I thought it might have been somewhat isolated to the Pacific Northwest because of those rule changes here in Oregon. But I came across this article coming out of Montana, and now I believe the name of this mill was Pyramid Mountain Mill or something like that, or I can't remember exactly the name of the mill, but there's the article down in the description. Now, I found it very interesting what this article is describing as the reasonings that they are shutting down. Now, some of it makes sense, and then a lot of it is also very questionable on what's going to be taking place going into the future if this is the mindset of a lot of these corporations that are happening out there, or at least in the mill side of things. So, Montana, if you go and take a look at this article, what they are talking about is shutting this mill down simply because they cannot afford to pay the employees what it costs to have the regular standard of living within this small town. So simply there is just not enough homes, right, to support all the people who are now moving to this town. It's a very, I guess, isolated area for the most part. And it was a place that a lot of remote workers were moving to. I'm assuming that the affordability of this particular town was probably much better than where a lot of these remote workers were originally from. And now moving to this smaller town, or to a town that has less homes available to it, is now making it very difficult for the people who are living there to afford a home. Right? So these remote workers come in, buy up all the available supply of homes, and now the people who are working there just simply can't find a place to live, right? And this is the problem that this mill is now facing, is that in order for these people to live in this particular town, they have to be paid a lot more in order to afford the homes there, right? So they can't afford to keep the mill in operation. So they're shutting it down, which is a major supplier of jobs to this particular town. Now you think about it, the town is short of homes. The exact product that you need to build the homes is a mill, right? The mill produces the products that you need to build a home, and they're shutting the mill down. Isn't this ironic? Now, this is something that we're probably going to be facing in a more profound manner as things continue on. I mean, just take a look at some of the issues that are taking place with like the pulp industry, right? A lot of these pulp mills, like literally the byproduct coming from the mill itself from producing lumber, this byproduct, the pulp, goes to paper industry, goes to making cardboard, goes to making other products that are out there. Now, I find this very interesting that a lot of these pulp manufacturers or pulp processors, right, making paper, are now shutting their mills down as well. So now you think about it, the byproduct that comes from the mill, if they don't have a place to go with this, that is a major product that comes from the mill. It's not just the lumber, but that byproduct, the pulp itself, right? That needs a place to go to. And if the pulp industries that are shutting down in those particular areas, where do they go with that byproduct, right? So this is another part of their profit that is going to get eaten into, as trying to find a place to distribute this stuff to is going to make it very difficult on them if these pulp manufacturers, or pulp, I shouldn't call them pulp manufacturers, pulp buyers, for the paper industry, end up stop using that particular byproduct coming from them. So now, like, let's think about what this is going to mean on a big industry, like on the whole industry wide of things. Because if this is a common theme that begins to ramp up, that these mills are simply not earning enough money or cannot charge enough for the lumber itself in order to pay the employees the cost of, or the standard of living that they need in order to keep the mill in operation, think about like what that is going to do to the inventory level of lumber itself, right? I mean, if the mills aren't getting enough for it to pay the employees, then the depletion of inventory is going to take place, right? The mills just simply won't be producing as much lumber. Now, On the flip side of that, where does the demand for lumber come from? Well, generally it's going to come from the builders, which hasn't been terribly exciting lately with the interest rates that have risen. But go and take a look at the builder sentiment. It has now turned positive, right? Now it's not completely positive on all aspects of it, but generally the builders out there are seeing a positive aspect to the building industry, to the housing market. Now, there is one part of it that is still extremely negative, and that is buyers' traffic. But sales condition, building condition, all that other stuff is really starting to improve into a much more positive position for a lot of these builders out there. So now I get to thinking about this. If you have builder sentiment starting to ramp up at the same time that you have an inventory of lumber depleting, the builder side of things, once they sign contracts, that's inelastic demand. They are going to demand that lumber regardless of where the price is or anything else. Like some people, if you're planning on doing like a remodel or maybe building the fence or the deck or something like that, and the prices move, you can postpone it. You can be like, whoa, I'm not doing it now, right? That's elastic, right? That's elastic demand. Whether you can or can't, that's the decision on whether or not you want to. Inelastic demand is once you sign contract and you're moving forward with it, you're going to go into it at any price, right? No matter what, you will pay any price to complete that project, especially once it is started. So now this is something that we could be facing here going into the future, is that the demand for new home builds could increase considering that the lack of homes that have been built over the last couple of years. Now, that's very questionable on the lack of homes. Like if you go and you look at the permit issuance and the new housing starts prior to the pandemic into where they are today, it's about the same. I mean, just prior to the pandemic kicking in, and the levels that we're at today are not too far off. The only problem that I'm seeing is that it's not a steady increase. It's like a plateau. So now the pool, think about it like this, the pool of buyers out there, if they are not buying homes, that pool continues to grow, whether they can afford it or not. The desire to build a home is increasing, or not to build, to buy a home, right? The desire to actually own one or be able to get into one, that's huge. Whether you can afford it or not, the desire is there. So now I think about foreclosures and stuff like that are coming in. These people who are sitting on the sidelines, they are itching. They are itching to jump at the next downturn in any kind of prices, especially with the idea that the interest rates are going to be lower going into the future. Like you could buy now and then refinance sometime, next year or something like that into lower interest rates. This really encourages a lot of people to be buyers out there. So now the pool of buyers is not diminishing. Okay? And the desire coming from the builders is probably going to increase, especially with the sentiment that is the way it is. If that buyer traffic, right, the home builder sentiment, if the buyer traffic starts to increase and become a little less negative, I should say, but moving more toward the positive side, the demand coming from the builder side going into lumber is probably going to be quite significant. And with the limited amount of lumber that is actually in the system right now, and considering the prices as low as they are, I could only assume that any kind of real pop to demand, which appears to be starting to manifest itself now, is going to start driving lumber prices up dramatically. And now you think about it, these mills that are shutting down, these are permanent shutdowns. Like they're not planning on reopening these or just like a curtailment for like a month or something. They're saying, hey, we're done. We're getting out of the game altogether. And so again, like you think about like once the increase in demand starts to pick up, trying to fulfill that demand with new lumber production is going to be quite difficult to just instantly ramp up and meet that demand if that demand was fairly significant. And again, if you think about like the interest rates that are supposedly going to be cut into the future, this starts increasing that home buyer demand. This is people who are very encouraged by the idea of buying a home today and then being able to refinance it going into the future. So everything that I see, no matter like which direction you go with it, if the interest rates were to remain elevated, right, then the demand for lumber won't pick up, the prices will stay low, mills will continue to shut down, right? If interest rates fall and the demand for lumber starts to pick up, then you're going to start seeing the prices move, right? So no matter which way I see it, the price of building a home is going to increase from here. And if the price to build a home increases, that's like the replacement cost of a home. How much does a home really sell for? Right. So this is one of the reasons why I just don't see the home prices coming down. A lot of people say, like, look at the foreclosures starting to rise. And I would almost agree with this. Yeah. Like the foreclosures are starting to move up. However, the actual, like, gone into foreclosures and completely, like, left the home, I think that's going to be very questionable on how much that actually ramps up, considering that most people could probably sell, unless they bought the home in the last 2 years, right? Most people who are carrying a home loan right now would most likely just be able to sell that house, right? Now, whether or not they could buy another one, that might be a question, that might be questionable for them. But for the most part, most people, like I said, unless you just bought it within the last couple of years, are probably not underwater on their mortgage, and that they could actually sell that house off and not actually allow it to go into foreclosure. Now, whether that will happen with everybody or just a handful of people or whatever, I guess time will tell with that. But again, like, as I go and look at some of the issues that we are facing right now with, just take a look at, like, even I think it came from the National Home Builders Association, the article that I left. I mean, they straight up say it right in there that the lumber prices will increase. Like, this is like almost like a guarantee. If there's any kind of pickup in home builder sentiment going into starting new homes, I just don't feel that the inventory levels that are out there can support any kind of significant pop, or like any kind of real increase to that. And then even if they were trying to produce lumber to fulfill that demand, might be very difficult, considering that there is only so much room that lumber can actually be produced at. Like, you can add extra shifts, but you cannot increase the kiln capacity. So this is like another, like, I'm just going to throw this out there and then we'll start reading some questions. But this is another limitation to the amount of lumber that can actually be produced and pushed out there into the system, is that a lot of lumber now used is kiln dried, meaning that they take this lumber, which is green to begin with, they put it into a big room, turn up the heat, cook all the water out of it, and then that lumber gets sold off as kiln dried lumber. So there's only so much room and so much capacity that can be produced using these kilns. Unless you actually produce more kilns, you're only limited to the amount that the kilns can produce themselves, which once inventory or once production ramps up, it'll meet that production level, and that's as much as they can actually produce. Give it time and they will, fill the system up, much like we experienced during the pandemic and the lumber ran up to 1,700 per thousand. The demand for lumber just shot right up through the roof. That's when the lumber went up to 1,700 per thousand. Very short inventory, but trying to fill that inventory in took a while. Once it did, it crashed the system. I mean, it crashed lumber from 17 down to 400, and then it shot back up to like 1,200 per thousand, and then landed back here around 600 per thousand. So anyway, that's my experience. Let's go and answer some questions here. We are 13 minutes into this with 350 people watching right now. Oh my gosh, 348, 82 likes. Go hit that like button for me real quick. We'll get this algorithm to send the video around for a few more people to join in. We are at 11:30 right now, so I have at least another 15 minutes to go here. All right, thanks for the heads up on the lumber side. This will be hard landing. Yeah, and so this is like, I would not hesitate one bit right now to go and pick up lumber. Like, I cannot see lumber being any cheaper than it is right now. It's only going to get more expensive from here. How long it takes for that, like, increase to take place, I don't know. Like, it could take a few months. It could take next year, right? It just really depends on what ends up taking place with these home builders, and then how much demand for new home construction actually starts to take place will then start ramping up the prices. But we're at a critical situation right now, at least in my opinion, when it comes to the amount of inventory that is available out there, and these mills shutting down doesn't add more, right? So this is the bottom, in my opinion. Could it go down a little bit more from here? Sure. Could it go down a lot? Yeah. Anything could happen. But everything that I'm experiencing from being right in the industry itself, I talk to loggers. I talk to mill operators. I talk to other wholesalers, distributors, retailers. Like, there's no part of this industry that I am not in communication with. And when I talk to the log truck drivers, I'm like, hey man, how many trips are you taking off the hill? And they say, hey, the mill is limiting us. Like we have quotas, right? Where we cannot bring any more to the mill than, say, I forget what the exact number was, but they had so many loads that they were allowed to take to the mill, which ultimately means like they can't cut as much as they want and deliver as much as they want. They are very limited on how much they can do. And this is something like I've asked them about, it's just like, is this something that you have experienced frequently? And they say, well, it's happened in the past, but no, this is not something that is very typical. And it's been this way for quite a while. Like the mill only has so much capacity for logs. Like they can't keep stacking them up. They're like, hey man, we're full here. We can't take any more. Right. And this is something that they are experiencing right now. I mean, I talked to a log truck driver just 2 weeks ago, right, who was saying this exact story. I've heard other people's like the fallers, like the people who are cutting the trees down, and they yard them up the hill. They're stacking logs up on the hill, right? Not even delivering them, just like staging them up there, waiting for the opportunity to deliver these things to the mill. This is a backing up of inventory that's happening, and it's pretty obvious to me, but it's harder for other people to see it if you're not like in the game, right? I mean, I know a lot of it's anecdotal evidence, but this is what I used in order to call out the lumber market back in 2020. All right, 386 people watching. My goodness, man, it's a huge live stream. Right on, guys. Thanks for joining in. Simon, I have a question for when you're finished going over the thoughts you were going to talk about in the stream. Okay. There's an idea that monetary policy moves in 40-year cycles. Interest rates and inflation going up for 40 years and then the opposite back and forth. Yeah, and Brody, I mean, I've heard that same thing before. And I could really like fall in line with a lot of this, cyclical aspects to things, because really everything is in cycles. Business cycles, debt cycles, all that stuff. But it's hard for me to really take into consideration the 40-year cycle, because we really haven't had fiat currency in a system that can test 40-year cycles. Like we've only experienced a full-on fiat currency, 100% fiat currency for a little over 50 years. So if we had like 120 years, and we could see those 40-year cycles actually taking place within the fiat currency. So I think that's going to be a little bit different than what we had, can take back from history, as far as whether or not those debt cycles in the fiat currency are going to be similar to what we had experienced in the past. Does that make sense? Like, I think they can carry the fiat currency debt cycle on longer than you could take it on during a fixed income or fixed currency, not fixed income, fixed currency situation, right? There's only so much gold to pay off all those debts, right? But you can keep printing out money to pay off the debts. And whether or not you can just keep doing it, I think time will tell, right? But right now, that's the case. And that when the debt comes due, like you would typically see in like a gold standard, that 40-year cycle, which I would assume would be like the idea of carrying on into the future, might get extended out a lot farther than what anybody would anticipate. All right, 409, man, this thing is just growing like crazy. I'm glad you all are here. Thank you for joining in. All right, you guys and girls, I hope everyone is having a day full of fabulous. Yeah, right on, all night. A great comment, man. All right, my fabulous here. Hey, everyone. All right, I'm going to cruise down to the bottom here. I'm sorry if I skipped over a bunch of people's comments, but we have so many comments ripping through right now. All right, let's see here. Let's go up. Oh, Benny. Let's see what Benny has to say. Benny's kind of like my resident troll. He's pretty cool, though. BTC is smokescreen, everyone. Don't be naive. Buy tangible. And if you're Simon, keep buying that smoke and balancing. How come I can't say some words, right? Balenciagas? Anyhow. Thank you, Benny, for the comment. All right. Isn't the demand for lumber super low right now? Builders already stacked up on lumber. Well, no, I don't think the demand is really low right now. I think the demand coming from the retail side is really low. But I think building demand is still just as prevalent as it was back in fact, it's more prevalent now than it was in 2018 if you just look at the permit issuance and home building starts, right? And it's very, like, I know for a lot of people it may be very difficult to kind of recognize that. There's some people in the, like, I put out videos of, like, home builders slowing down and stuff, and there's people who are like, dude, you need to come to my area. There's 10,000 houses being built right now or something like that. And yeah, every housing market, every location, there's places all over this nation that aren't going to look the same. I speak generally, like, just from the feelings and the conversations that I have. I live way out in the Pacific corner of the Pacific Northwest, over in the corner of Oregon, right? And so, like, what happens here is not even going to be what's happening in Texas or something like that. There's two completely different markets, huge demand differences. Everything about it is very different. However, the demand for lumber does come from my area. Like, I'm sure even with the new changes to the rules and stuff like that that are happening, I might do a video talking about that particular topic, but even with the change to the way that they conduct themselves here in Oregon with the lumber production, it's still, I believe, the number one lumber producing state in the entire nation, right? So a lot of lumber comes out of Oregon. We are very sensitive up here to the issues. So when all of a sudden the mill is saying, "Hey, I can't take any more logs," that's saying that the demand for lumber is really low coming from these builders. But it's not just from the builders, it's also from the retail side of things. So yeah, building demand was much higher during the pandemic as everybody was leaving the city and moving out to the country, out to the suburbs. Everybody was, like, remodeling their house, building additions, doing the whole decks, fences, isolation thing. So there was a lot of demand for lumber right then, which really spiked the lumber up. And when you have these builders who are, again, in inelastic demand, they will pay any price for this lumber, especially if there's none to be had and they are in the middle of the project and contracted to do it. They will, again, they will pay 1,700 per thousand for that. So again, like, right now, I feel, although the building sentiment is improving, can it be much higher than it is right now? I do think so. Like, if we were to continue on the trajectory that we were on prior to the pandemic, which was still an undersupply of homes being built, then I would imagine that any kind of pop to that building sentiment and building demand out there, like, they start increasing it to the levels that we were experiencing during the pandemic, and yeah, you're going to see lumber prices just extremely move, in and move up in extreme ways. All right. This makes sense. Thank you for addressing my question. Yeah, you're welcome, Brody. Thanks for the question itself, man. All right. Owen, my dad is an independent log truck driver, and I worry about how much longer he will be able to work the current state of the market. Yeah, that is a very legitimate concern. And again, even if the demand was to pick up, like, the mills are loaded on logs, right? So as they're starting to process through all those logs, the demand for logs might pick up, but right now they have such a significant supply out there that it might be a while before you actually see that moving back into the logging industry, where they're actually falling more trees and hauling more trees off the hill and bringing them to the mill. That might take a while. So yeah, if your dad's a log truck driver or something like that, it may be into sometime into the summer, or maybe even after summer, before, like, demand really starts picking up for those new logs to come off the hill into the mill. Simon, when they claimed there was a lumber shortage in 2020, our mills on the West Coast were full of lumber. You could drive by a mill and the lumber was stacked up to the edge of the roads and rails. Okay, Junkyard Dog, I totally agree with you on that. In fact, I was one of the first people to go to my local mill, do a, go around the entire yard showing all the stacks of lumber out there, and said, yeah, it doesn't look like any shortage to me. I was one of the first people to put out a video like that, and it just blew up, and all these people started showing all this lumber that was all over the place. Here's the thing, right? Lumber is distributed to a lot of throughout a lot of distribution networks, or through a lot of distribution hubs. Most of the lumber that you would see at a mill, at a distribution hub, or even sitting on the rails, has already been sold. It has a place that it needs to go to. So now, during the pandemic, there was a severing of the supply chain, right? The mills were in operation. They stacked up a bunch of lumber, but trying to get that lumber away from the mill became very difficult. Truck drivers were limited, rails were limited, distribution was severed, right? So all of a sudden, these mills are sitting on a bunch of lumber. They're like, yo, we need to get this stuff through the system, right? We need to get this moving. And if you can imagine like a river, like a conveyor belt of lumber, like a conveyor belt, like going across the nation, right? Here up in the Pacific Northwest, we have the supply of lumber. But down in the southern part of the United States, Arizona, right? You go to New Mexico, you go down to these areas, right? There's not as much lumber down in there. So now they have to ship all this lumber from the Pacific Northwest through rails, through trucks, all the way down to that particular area where it's dry. Like, say, we're full of it up here. We got lumber liquidity like crazy. Down there, they're lumber dry. Okay? So now, here comes this steady supply of lumber that needs to travel by rail, by truck, by however it can get there. And generally, those are the two. I mean, you could put it on a barge and ship it down through on ships. I mean, I've seen that happen before too. Right? But now you need to get this in a continuous supply, because once it gets there, it's immediately purchased, right? Like almost immediately as soon as it gets there. And it's difficult to even get it there, right? So the demand is huge. Until that steady supply becomes like a continuous conveyor belt where it's a steady supply of train load after train load after train load of lumber, carrying it away from the mill into those particular areas, then you're going to see it stacked up at the mills. You're going to see it stacked up at the distribution networks. You're going to see it, stacked up everywhere where there's a lot of lumber, but in the places where you can't get it to, they're going to be dry. And this is where the demand for lumber picks up and the prices are so high. You might be paying 17, like, 1,000 per thousand for lumber and just see it for miles. But you're in the Pacific Northwest, the same price that you're going to be paying down in Arizona, because it's a commodity. It's a global commodity. And so the price you pay up here is the price you're going to pay down there as well. And you might pay a little bit more, just because of the location that it's at and the demand from the people there and the lack of availability. You might buy a 2x4 up here for $4 and you might be buying it down there for $4.75. Like, I can imagine something like that being the case. But for the most part, it's the same lumber being distributed to everywhere. Right? Again, like, Southern yellow pine is not the same as, Pacific Northwest Doug fir, right? These are two different products, but again, moving on. All right, man, we're almost at 500 people watching. I love it. All right, good morning. Just tuning in. I hope all is going well for everyone. That was Salty Monkey. Thank you very much, Salty Monkey. Let's cruise down here and read some of these lower comments. All right, Lumberjack Landlord. Great seeing you here, man. Foreclosures start are far different from foreclosure completes. Yeah, and that's I totally agree with that. And that's why I didn't get real excited when I saw the foreclosures rising. It's because I kind of almost anticipated that. What I really want to see is, well, not want to see it, what would really need to be seen for those foreclosures to make a significance is the actual going into foreclosure process where they're taking the home back. I'm assuming that this foreclosure process, or once it's started, most people will put that home up for sale and get it sold out before the foreclosure actually takes place. Thank you very much, Lumberjack Landlord, for being here. And yeah, if there's anybody who knows about real estate, it would be that dude. All right. My BTC allocation is full AF, but I want others to learn and decide for themselves. I'm not pumping. Hey, I'm in a total agreement with All Nighter. My mission is to own 1 Bitcoin. I'm a little under a half a Bitcoin right now. So I try to encourage everybody to try and own at least 1 Bitcoin by dollar cost averaging if you can. And that's really like the way that I've done it. I don't even really know how much I've invested into Bitcoin over these years. I just buy $50 every week, every other week, once a month, whenever I can do it. And just by stacking it up over the years that I have, I've accumulated almost a half a Bitcoin. I had a pretty significant amount given to me as well. But, doing it that way and then keeping very low expectations of what it's going to do, like, go to $1 million or, give you your retirement or something like that. Like, I don't give it that sort of level of expectations. My expectations of Bitcoin are very low. but it's pretty cool to have it because really, like, it's the most significant portion of everything that I really have. And I think that's kind of neat, right? I mean, not bad. But again, like, I keep my expectations pretty low. All right. Yo, bro, nice car, bro. 99 Ford Explorer. All right. Yes, gotta follow trusty sales, not foreclosure starts. All right. I'm just hope. Okay, this is coming from Knox Zero talking all nighter. I just hoping it's a repeat. Hopefully, after the halving, there's a face melting run. And once I see celebrities hyping it up, see Coinbase, the number one download app, I exit. Yeah, that's actually there was I don't know if it was a study or whatever, but I remember reading this article or this report talking about like the media. If the media is positive on Bitcoin, you sell. If media is negative about Bitcoin, you buy. And that was the only cues that these people had used, and it was like this incredible, like significant um, market indicator. And I wish I had the article to share with you guys, but I just remember reading that. I was just like, okay, so if you're hearing bad news, if there's bad news about Bitcoin in the market, you buy. You buy when there's bad news. And then if there's good news, everybody's talking about how awesome it is, then you sell it. You get out from underneath it as quickly as possible. All right, $5 super chat. Let's go check that out. Hey, John, thank you very much for the $5. What is the most northern part of Canada lumber trees can actually grow? Wow. I'm not sure how far north they actually go with it, but the significant portion of the lumber comes out of the British Columbia area. Like a lot of people don't even realize how much lumber is produced up in British Columbia. It is ungodly amount. And so you think about this kind of concentrated area and the amount of production that comes out of this one area. I can't tell you the exact number because I don't know, but if I remember, like, I don't know if you guys remember Keta. She is the person who I don't know if she owns it or it's her family business, Madison's Lumber Reporter. Anyway, she is super knowledgeable when it comes to to lumber. And if I remember right, she was saying that the British Columbia area produces 50% of the lumber that is out of all of Canada. They produce 50% of the lumber that is imported into the United States. Of the portion of lumber that is imported to the United States, it represents 20% of our supply, right? So you can imagine like 20% of the lumber that's here in the United States comes from Canada. And of that 20%, 50% of that comes from this little tiny area of, well, it's not little, it's quite vast, but of the British Columbia area, right? So like everything that's happening in British Columbia is the most important part of the Canadian lumber industry. And now these guys are incredibly high cost, high output producers, right? So the majority of this lumber that comes out of there is coming from mills that are high cost mills, meaning that, it it costs them more to produce lumber than just about anybody else does, right? Whether it's the mill cost, operations, labor cost, supplying the logs are getting distance, whatever it is, that is a high output, high cost producer. So the moment that they get hit with like an incredible drop in lumber prices, those mills shut down right now. They will curtail like lumber production like almost immediately if they have a fall in price. So again, like the British Columbia area out of all of Canada, I think is probably the one place that you would want to focus in on if there was any place within the Canadian lumber industry that was to be significant, it would be up there. Yeah, let's see here. Christopher Bonds, ICF will be the new lumber. I don't know. The insulated concrete forms. So, for those of you who are not familiar with ICFs, insulated concrete forms are like these styrofoam blocks that you can kind of assemble almost like Legos, for the most part, and then you fill it with concrete, right? So now these are your actual walls, so your exterior walls for the house. They're incredibly strong, incredibly high insulation value to it. Like I forget how much the insulation value is, like R60 or some crazy number, right? Very very strong in my opinion, like very suitable for construction. However, it doesn't seem to be that popular up here. Now, I do know of quite a few insulated concrete formed houses, but out of like all the homes that I see being built, they're all out of like traditionally stick framed. And, whether that change is going into the future, it doesn't seem to be that significant of a change that is happening, or at least that significant of a process to building homes that is going to change away from the lumber industry. Like, I just don't see that taking place. And, I would imagine that it has to do with like distribution. Like, if you have insulated concrete forms and you have to have a supplier of concrete, cement mix, company that's going to be, within the reason, within the region, within that area. But you can haul like all the materials to build a stick frame home. You can haul them out to an island out there in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, it's just a piece at a time. So very different from the way that you use concrete to build a home, right? I don't know. That's just kind of me thinking out loud about that. If there's going to be any significant change to the way that homes are constructed, I think that's really going to come from the cross-laminated timber industry. And I feel like that's probably going to be a very significant change to not only like the way that homes are constructed, but definitely like commercial buildings. You're already finding like hospitals, schools, apartment complexes, like office buildings, all being built 100% out of wood structure, which I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, think about like the rot issues, the bug infestations, the fire issues. Okay? They've solved all those problems. Like even seismic, these things are more seismic resistance, like for earthquakes, than your traditional concrete and steel buildings are. It's just not prevalent enough to be like common out there. Like you're finding buildings are doing it, but you really need a location, much like a concrete mixing company. You need this like cross-laminated timber manufacturers to be somewhat in the area to distribute that material to the job site itself. Once that becomes more prevalent across the nation, I think you're going to find a lot more like all wood structured buildings, even big commercial ones done out of it. All right. What time is it? Okay, guys, we are getting really close to the end of this. I really appreciate everybody being here. We're 37 minutes into it. We're going to do like another 5 minutes, and then I got to go back to work. All right. Wow, that would be cheap on the AC or heating. Yeah, Crash Farmer, you are absolutely right. So these buildings, like the houses that I knew that had these insulated concrete forms to it, like I forget what the heating expense was for this guy, but it was insignificant. It was like it almost didn't even like you could heat the place with like a couple of space heaters, and and they were incredibly happy for that. The one thing that I had a concern about is just like, well, what if it comes time to do like an addition or a remodel or something, and now you got to bust through all this concrete wall and this foam and stuff like that. I don't know if that's necessarily a big deal. Like you could probably just, cut through it with a saw or whatever, like a big, construction saw, animal saw. But still, like, it's not like your traditional building where you can take like, something simple like a sawzall and cut a hole in the wall and put a window in. It's going to be a little bit different than that. All right, I got another super chat from good old Matthew, Lumberjack Landlord, man. Thank you so much for the $10. Love cross-laminated timber. Also, 3D printing will be a big boom as well for affordable single-family living in many areas. Yeah, and I think they're going to get better at the 3D printing homes. And I consider it for my own personal area because like I can only look around to the builders that I'm working with and the traditions that we are used to. One of the things about the Pacific Northwest is that it rains 9 months out of the year. Like literally 9 months out of the year, it'll rain, and those months aren't consistent, right? So it can be, summertime that you have, 30 days of rain. Like literally, like the entire month of June could be, raining every single day. What concerns me about the 3D printed homes is that they lay a layer of concrete on top of each other, and they just keep going around and around. So you have like, I'm just going to assume it's like about a 1-inch layer of concrete stacked on top of another 1-inch layer of concrete, and keep stacking that up until you have built the entire wall. Sounds great, but what if you're in the middle of a downpour? Like, how consistent are those walls going to be if you're just dumping rain on top of these little pads of concrete or these little lines of concrete that are being poured? most of that is probably going to end up washing away. So having to do a 3D printed home in the middle of winter probably won't be very successful here in the Pacific Northwest. Other places it might not be a big deal, right? So bringing 3D printed homes up to the Pacific Northwest might not work out, but 3 months out of the year, and nobody knows exactly what those 3 months are going to be, you know. But thank you very much, Matthew, for the comment and the super chat. I really appreciate it. But other than that, like I could see where, like, you know, especially in drier climates, I could totally see where 3D printed homes would work, right? But it doesn't. It's not the same for all areas, you know, especially like here in the Pacific Northwest. All right, I missed the earlier part of the stream. Why are home prices continuing to skyrocket? I'm interested in your thoughts. I agree with that idea. It's because the cost of building homes is going to keep rising, and replacement cost of homes, and I just don't see where foreclosures are going to add inventory to the level. So, in a nutshell. All right, housing purchases have slowed way down because of rates and prices. How will prices skyrocket more if people aren't buying now? But people are buying. That's the problem that I think a lot of people are missing, is that a lot of homes are still going to all cash buyers, right? And now you think about it. You know, if you think about, like, if there's less people buying homes right now, those people who are not buying, who are saying, hey, I can't afford it, or I'm not paying these higher interest rates for it, I'm not buying, right? Those people move to the sidelines. They want a home, right? It's not like they aren't demanding or are not part of the demand side of the homes. Like, the demand side is quite prevalent, right? In fact, how many people do you know are just sitting there going, nah, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. I hear that from so many people out there. Like, I'm waiting to buy a house. And I'm thinking, well, you and everybody else is waiting too, right? So the moment that somebody has an idea that there is going to be better interest rates going into the future, they'll jump on that house right now before anybody else does, with the idea that they'll be able to refinance that going into the future. The demand side of things, you got supply and you got demand, right? So if the demand is far outstripping the supply, then the prices are going to stay up, right? That's all there really is to it. Whether they can afford it, can't afford it, whatever happens, right? It doesn't matter. If the demand is there, then it is far higher than the supply. The demand supply imbalances is what causes the prices to move up. Like, that's all you, I mean, really, that's all you have to look at. Now, you can come up with all the reasonings and excuses why the supply is going to rise, right? All of a sudden, these builders are just going to overwhelm everybody with new starts, right? Maybe. I doubt it, right? All of a sudden, there's going to be a wave of foreclosures taking place. We kind of talked about that a little bit. Nah, probably not the wave of foreclosures like we saw during the Great Financial Crisis, as most people, unless they bought it in the last couple of years, are probably not underwater on their mortgage, and they would just sell that house, right? So where does the inventory come from to meet that demand? Even though the demand side of things is going, no, I'm waiting, but they're still part of the demand, right? I mean, if the price came down, they would be right there, right? So they're not going anywhere. They're still there, right? They didn't disappear. So the demand side is still far outstripping the supply, and as long as that stays elevated, the prices will continue to move up. And I'm not trying to say like that's going to be the same for every single housing market across the country. I'm just kind of generally speaking here. You might find, like, even in my area, like the house that I'm living in, the Zillow estimate had dropped $80,000 off the price of it or something, but it was this stupid amount that they had it like estimated at, right? It's just so extreme. However, I have like 100 grand in equity in the house, even, after just 2 years of being in it. Like, it's just a stupid amount. So even if I couldn't make the payment, I would just sell the house and probably end up with more money than when I went into it with. Man, 544 people. I just want to stay out here and keep going, but I got to go back to work, guys. Dang. All right. Well, we're to the end here. I'm going to read one last question, and then I got to call it quits, even though I don't want to. All right. Homes can also cost more due to deflation. If you think long-term wages go up eventually, we can probably sustain more pain than we realize. It's hard for us to see it because we don't want to. 3D print your own home using Super Adobe. Hit the like button. Yes, guys, please go hit that like button. I hope you enjoyed the live stream. Um, you know, I don't know. I don't know exactly, what it is that's going to be taking place going into the future, as far as where the home builders' demand is going to be, where the lumber supply is going to be, and where prices are going to end up. All I can tell you is right now, everything that I am seeing within the industry, we are at a bottom. If you need lumber going into the future, I would not hesitate. I would buy that lumber and I would store it for the future. If you have a project planned for this summer or anytime, even maybe in the distant future here, or not too distant future, I wouldn't hesitate on buying that building supplies, right? um, some things are getting easier, like windows, right? Windows used to take me close to 30, 40, even 50 days to get. I can get a vinyl window now in 2 weeks, which is absolutely incredible. The supply is now very, very much caught up, as far as like the backlogs of windows. The prices are still elevated. They seem to not be coming down very much, but the lead time has shortened up quite a bit. So time is money. So in a way, that did come down in price if you consider time being money. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there as well. So thank you so much for joining in on this live stream. Thank you everybody who went and hit that like button. And thank you so much for the super chats. You guys are always so very supportive of the channel. All right. Would like to see Simon, George, and Schiff in the same interview. Hey, now that would be a lot of fun. I've interviewed both George Gammon and Peter Schiff, so they know who I am, right? But if I could get them into some sort of like conversation or even a debate about like the economy from the working class point of view as opposed to like the investor side of things, I would love to have that kind of conversation with those guys. I think that would just be absolutely amazing. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.